So let's just do a simple example here. I'm just going to delete all this. And here is our first for loop in code. Okay? Let's go over the different parts again. I'm going to hammer this into your heads today as well as next week over and over and over again until this thing becomes so rote that you guys will be unable to think of anything except for loops, because it's one of the things that it's very easy to forget if you don't use it, but also it's also very powerful, so I want you guys to know how to use it. All right, there are three parts to this for loop. There is the integer I equals 0, which is that's the initialization. That thing runs one time. Notice here, we're actually declaring a variable for int I inside that loop right there. And this is also super common. Okay? So you don't have to do this. I just want to say that even though it's being done in line here, you can actually put that outside here, like that if you want to. Same thing. There's a little bit of a difference. I'm not going to highlight it just yet, but I will say that this, doing the variable outside, changes where the scope of that variable lives. You guys remember when I talked about scope 2 weeks ago at all? Like where you could access that variable? If you declare that variable outside of that for loop, you can access it within the entire scope of... Oops. Let me do line numbers here. You can access it within the entire scope from 11 all the way down to 17. If you declare the variable inside the for loop, you can only use that variable on line 13, and that's it. Line 13 and inside the loop up here, line 11. So that is the difference between the two, but you can functionally do whatever you want to in there. All right. So next thing that will happen, again, is it will run the test expression, and if it's true, it will loop, and then increment that variable. All right, so let's run this and see what happens. Any questions so far on this? It's going to make a bit more sense, hopefully, soon. All right. This is a value of my variable right now. I haven't run the initialization statement yet. Okay. That's why that variable is negative 8.5 million or 85 billion. 8 billion, I'm not sure exactly how many digits are there. Yep. So I stepped one time, and two things happened. It set I equal to 0, and it tested to see if it should loop or not. Then it went inside that body. Okay? After it runs the body, it's going to restart the loop. So what is it going to do after it restarts the body? Who knows? It adds one. So if I step, so it goes to line 14, it's going to go back up to line 11.
It's going to check to see if I is less than 10.
Not yet. Remember the flowchart? The first thing it does is updates. Then it checks to see if I is less than 10. Okay, that's the order. So we're about to do two of those things. So it's about to do this right here. It's about to add 1 to I, and then immediately afterwards, it's going to see if I is less than 10. That is the order. And you guys are going to maybe sometimes forget that, but it has to happen in that order. You have to add 1 to I first and then compare. And it will always run in that order after you've looped once. So now, if I loop again, it's going to go in there. Now I is equal to 1, and it runs the loop body. I'll loop one more time. It's going to add 1 to I again, see if I is less than 10, which it is. Okay, so let me give you guys a little bit of a test here. I'm going to get to 9 here. Is this going to loop one more time or not?
It's going to check to see if it can, and then it will just end.
Will it loop or not, I guess is the answer. It will not. Okay, why will it not? I is less than 9. I is less than 10 right now.
Because it's going to go up, it's going to add a number, and then it's going to check.
Right. It's going to add a number, and then it's going to check. If it checked first, it would loop one more time, right? But instead, it skips. because it actually added 1 before it checked it. You see here how I is gray? This is what I'm talking about variable scope. You can't access I right here. If I tried to write a line of code here that said print out what I is, you can't. Let me do a test right here. What is going to be the output of this program?
0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
What did I just change though? It's not going to run, right? Okay, cool. What if I do that? Same thing? Is it order? Let's run through some more examples here. Here's a program for a for loop. You don't have to start at 0. You can start at whatever number you want to. And actually, you don't have to count up. You can count down. Doesn't matter. What is this going to print? I'm going to start at 9 and go all the way down to 0. So let's step through here and figure out like what the actual program is doing. First thing, it looks different, but functionally it's the same. You have to remember what a for loop does. I gets set equal to 9. Then what happens? Check to see, right? Yeah, it checks to see if it should loop, which it does, because I is 9. And then it prints it out, and then it updates. So what is that update doing here in this case? Minus I, what does that do? It subtracts 1, right? It subtracts 1 and then sees if it's greater than 0. So you can count backwards too. This is actually going to print out numbers 9, 8, so on and so forth. Okay, counts from 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Why would you ever want to count backwards in a for loop? What's that? Lives. No, lives aren't really something that you loop over. Oddly enough, lives are you have like 3 lives.
Like we'll be using multiple.
Timer, or someone said.
We'll be using multiple potions on yourself.
Sure.
Like cooldowns, right?
Yeah. What if? How about this? Like, what if I'm eating? What if I just have an option in my inventory to drop all the items that I have, right? Or let's say I have, let's say the order of, let's say I cast an AOE spell, right? And I have a list of all the enemies that I want to go over and apply that spell to. I'm playing Diablo 3, and I cast, I don't know, fucking Disintegrate, right? It hits all these enemies in a line. The order in which I apply damage to is up to me. If I apply damage to the first guy first, I can loop forwards. If I apply damage to the last guy first, I can loop backwards. And that matters because maybe the guy in the end that I hit has some kind of reflect damage ability, and he reflects damage first and kills me before I get to apply damage to the rest. Or maybe I apply damage to the first guy in front of me first, right? Sometimes counting backwards is important because sometimes the order in which you go through a list of things when you're going through a loop, or the order that you're counting, matters. It doesn't always matter. Like most of the time an AoE spell or something, it doesn't matter if you cast it and hit everyone. It doesn't matter if you do the first guy first or the last guy first. So most of the time you're going to be looping forwards. But understand that you can go backwards if you want to. So in this case here, what if I change that condition? What did I just remove here? Greater than or equal to 0.
It's going to only go 1, right?
Yeah. So it's going to be the same kind of loop. Only difference is that it's going to stop at 1 instead. So that expression in the middle you could change. And it's very easy to get it confused as to whether you need greater than or equal to or less than or equal to. Okay. So I want you guys to write a loop that counts and prints out a number starting at 1 and going to 100. It prints out the numbers 1 all the way up to 100. Okay?
Did you want to see that other one? Or
What's that?
The other lab you had us do?
Oh, did you do it? Here, I'll come around and take a look at that if you have that done too. So just print out, just do a quick for loop. Count up from 1 to 100 and print that out to the screen. It should take about 2 or 3 minutes. Hey, here, I'll put the syntax up for the loop. I'll put the other code up here. Start at 1 though. Don't start at 0. I want to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way up to 100.
All right, hold on. Yeah, it should be NAC agent
This is right. This one.
No, I'm sorry, that's right.
Oh, there we go, there we go. Okay.
Less than.
You may have to write.
Wait. Hold on.
It's up the same thing.
Is that an application?
Yeah, just write out the loop. If you don't have it going from 1 to 100, fix it. Okay, so this is I think what you did last one.
Okay.
I didn't do the last one.
So like here, here's a trick you can do. Rewrite this, but don't use an if statement.
Don't use this thing?
Yeah, how would you do that on a single line? How would you take those 4 lines and make it single?
Click on.
Because if you wrote that, that's like a pretty, it's a really common, like, I have even written like, oh shit, I should be so close to writing an if statement. You don't use an if statement. So what does it mean? Start at?
That is a brain.
Yeah, how do you take those 4 line collapse into 1?
Probably don't think it was.
Yeah, you are.
Yep.
First of all, it's got to be 1 line, so you have to delete 3 of those. Which of those 3 are you going to delete?
Okay, no, line here.
Yeah, okay. And what are you left with? How do you get that? How do you get that 1 line to do exactly what you're supposed to? Yeah, what do you think about it? Because you can totally do it. Did you get it? 1 to 100? No, you're counting from 0 to 100. Yeah.
I didn't know you wanted about 1 or 0. No, it's right.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 100. Okay. Now flip it. Count from 100 down to 1.
Maybe.
Get it? 1 to 100? Okay, flip it. Once you get to 1 to 100, flip it so it goes from 100 to 1.
I don't know.
That's right. That's counting from 0 to 100, so that's wrong. Look out there. What is in the middle of there? That compared to what you have. Yeah. Remember, the middle thing is what you're testing. That thing, the middle thing has to be true in order for you to keep looping.
Oh my gosh.
Oh.
Show one individual.
Let's
click the information.
Yeah, that's fine. You're just not doing it.
Also, when I did it,
And go backwards now. Once you have
How do you do it computer down, second on the way.
Yeah. That's how you don't want to do 101.
And now do it.
Don't close that. From 100 down to 1.
So have your one unity page.
So that middle part right there, look what I'm doing in the middle of there. I'm comparing I less than 10. So you are adding 100 to I every time.
Wait, go to the process page again. I have one last idea. One last idea.
What is that operator?
Yeah. Come backwards.
Let me see your account.
So it's process.
How would you do that without? So that's kind of on the. Well, I guess that works. Typically, the way that you do loops is try to do. We try. It's funny. We try not to use that greater than or equal to operator, but that's good. So, like, if you put 0 in there instead, what would you have to change? Change that 1 from 1 to 0. What would you have to change?
I don't need those 3 lines. How would I make this?
Yeah, like delete that 1 and put 0 in, and give me the same result as here. Yeah, you almost had it.
Before,
You got a plus there.
he said, no.
I guess I didn't need to sign obviously.
Yeah. Yep. Less code to write. That's good. Kind of backwards. All right. Looks like most people got it. I'll change that to a
It should work.
That is how you kind of forward from 1 to 10, so you should be able to do that correctly. This is really great.
No, we can't do that. They might print math. No, they might do it. It's too far. They'll be like, programmers fucked it up. Programmers get it on Mac.
I did. Whoever's last in this room actually put on the map. That's a punishment computer. I have no idea.
That looks like a... You ever watch that Top Gear?
Okay, so next question, guys. The arts.
Where does it actually get the error?
I thought I had it wrong the whole time. That's the only reason why I'm not sure.
I mean, Bomberman normally
Is this wrong? Yeah.
But how would you describe the word cheat? Using the word cheat.
All right, so let's go over how to do that. So if you want to count forward up to 100, starting at 1, you can easily change this to 100. The problem is if you do this by itself, it'll actually only count up to 99. And I actually want to include 100. There are 2 ways you could do that. You could either make this thing 101. I would not recommend doing that. Making it 101 is not actually clear what you're trying to count to. It makes it look like you're trying to count to 101. Do this instead. And then counting backwards would be I used to go 100. You reverse this guy. And there's 2 ways you can write this. I is greater than 0. Or you can do I is greater than or equal to 1. Both are okay. Either one is fine in this case. So those are the ways you count back. This is how you count backwards. All right? All right, let's do a little bit more here.
Yeah, I know.
Let's do... Okay, so here's an example of a way you can increment the loop, but instead of going 1 at a time, it's counting by 5.
Ah, there it is.
So this is good if you're making like a Bomberman, or you're making like a some other type of grid game that you want to count by multiples of something. So can anyone tell me how many times this is going to loop off the top of the 10? 10 is a good guess.
9.
And what is going to output? 9? Not, it's 10. But I can put a breakpoint here. So it prints out by 5s, right? So here, we can count by anything. What if I counted here by 9 here? Notice the expression here is still comparing less than or equal to 50. Okay? You can put any expression you want in there. So here I'm counting by 9s. So 0, 9, 18, 27, 36, 45, right? I can also write this without using plus equals. This is just another way. You could do that same thing too. Same exact thing. Counting up by nines, right? Most often your for loops are going to be counting up by 1 because you want to count some number of times. Okay. Here's something we haven't seen yet. Your for loop, the things in between the semicolons, I know I showed you guys this slide here where you have to have an initialization, a test expression, an update. Well, those are all optional. What does that mean that they're optional? It means that you can leave them out if you want to. It means that when you leave them out, it doesn't actually run that line of code. So here, I left out the initialization part of the for loop. I don't do count equals 0. This loop looked like this, right? That's what it looked like here. You don't have to do that. You can put that outside of here. I can just literally take this, move it up here, and leave that thing blank. Same exact output. So here's the crazy part. You can do that for all of them. Any of them are optional. What happens if I just straight up just delete this guy? That'll compile. What will run? Well, let's run through this. So there's my count. Initialization statement runs once. It does nothing. Then it tests to see if count is less than 10. And it is. Then it runs the sad little empty blank space there, which does nothing. And then it tests the expression. So what did I just make here? I just made an infinite loop, right? What if I just deleted this thing here? Now that's also valid. Some people do this. This is one way to make an infinite loop. This is the same exact code as me writing while true. These two things are exactly the same. Okay? This while true and this exactly the same. So instead of doing that, I can do this. Will that give me a different result, though, since I put it on line 16? Does anyone know if that gives me a different result than if I put it inside?
Count before checking?
It does count before checking, but is that different? What does a for loop normally do before checking? Let's go back to the flowchart here. Yeah, it adds, right?
So that's the same.
It's the same exact thing. This, yeah, it's a different. It's actually not even a different order. It actually does the body, then adds one, and then tests it.
Just a different place.
Yeah. So this is exactly the same here. If I put this on this line, as if I put it here. Okay. We won't do this kind of thing typically. This is not like a common thing, but understand that this is something that can happen. This may be on the final. The fact that you can write a for loop and you can leave everything inside of it out. You can leave pieces of it out if you want to. You don't have to leave. I can delete the middle part here. I can delete just that. If there's no expression in the middle, it treats it as true. It means loop. And this thing will just loop forever.
Matrix.
Yeah. Matrix code.
Now that I think about it, like Matrix is like the guys that
These are just looping through all the different characters. You see like smiley faces and stuff in there. class, there's like playing card. There's like a heart and spades and stuff. You can make a card game out of it.
Cool, could you make it like a picture out of? What a fucking jam.
That's what the old school DOS games used to be. The little rectangles and stuff. Yeah.
Is it possible to change the color of the output text through the,
You can, yes. It's more work than you think it would be. It's not worth it. Don't worry, we'll get to actually drawing. You guys are eager, I know, to like get to actually drawing stuff that's not just text. I understand. We'll get to that.
Okay.
But not right now. Yeah, I wish it was just like, oh, just there's a function or some line you can write that just changes the color to be like red or something like that. It's actually a little less trivial than that. All right, so finally, let's get into the most complicated usage case of a for loop, but the most common case for a game like Tetris or a game like Bejeweled or Candy Crush. If you guys want to be the next developers of Candy Crush, or you guys want to make a game and make billions of dollars, you will have to learn how to use one of these. Because most puzzle games involve like grids of some kind, right? You think about like all these puzzle games, like they have like a grid, like Bejeweled has like a 10 by 10, or like Tetris has like an 8 by 10. Like each of those games has pieces inside of it that use a loop like this. So this is what's called a nested loop. We talked about nested statements before, how you could put multiple if statements in the same one, right? Do you guys remember that example before? Let me bring that up for you for a refresher here. Trying to remember if it was this. Trying to remember which one of these things it was. So here's an example where an if statement lives inside of a loop. This is a nested if statement inside of a loop. Remember that you can put multiple if statements inside of an if statement. Oh. Remember how you can do as many of these as you want to, right? So the more of these you write. So you can keep going if you want to. These are all nested. The same thing works for a loop. So let me simplify this a little bit. This is a nested loop, but really, it's just doing that. That's what the line of code looks like here. So let me talk over what this is actually doing. This is going to loop over what are called rows, and then it's going to loop over columns. So it's going to work exactly like a regular for loop. However, because there's a loop inside of another loop, the number of times it's actually going to write this line of code is a combination of both the outside loop and the inside loop. Can anyone tell me how many times that thing's going to loop? How many times this line is going to be written? Now that you know that it's going to run this loop and then this loop. Let's step through this one time and just show you what the execution looks like. So first things first, same thing. It runs the first for loop. It's using a variable here, but it doesn't have to be a variable. Keep in mind that this variable is literally just a number 5. It's literally just a number 3. Okay, that makes it any easier for you guys to see. Okay. Like that. That's all this loop is doing, okay? It's just going to initialize to 0. What would you normally say this loop does? It counts to 5. It does 5 times, right? We've already established that you guys can write a loop that does it 5 times. Cool. How many times does it loop this one here? 3 times. Okay, so how many times total is that line in the inside going to loop? If it does this 3 times for every loop on the outside, it will do this 3 times every time I loop the outside. How many times will it do this? I heard someone say 15. Right? So this loops 3 times here. This whole thing loops 5 times. So watch. I'm going to do this inside loop 1, 2, 3. I'm done. I go back. 1, 2, 3. I'm done. 1, 2, 3. I've already done it 9 times now. I'm done. 1, 2, 3, 12. And then I got one more. 1, 2, 3, 15. So what did it actually print out here?
Mario levels
Coordinates, right? You guys remember like plotting things? So if I were to draw a Tetris grid, I'm going to draw the smallest Tetris board ever. Looks like the number of rows is 5. So I'm going to draw. I'll do 1. It's 5 rows, 3 columns. That's our Tetris board. You guys know, like, you can have Tetris pieces like this. If this is 0, 0, it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. 0, 1, 2. Which blocks, which coordinates are currently occupied by that? You have 3, 0, 4, 0,
And you got 4, 1, and 4, 2.
4, 1, and 4, 2. That looks like a Tetris piece to me if you were to take those circles and draw them out like that, right? So Tetris is written exactly like this. This is actually very close. I'll actually show you guys. You do this a lot. Can you guys see that, Luke? Oh, you can. That's what it's like. This is a snippet from a Tetris program that I wrote. Do you guys see this loop right here? Can you guys read that? It's kind of tiny. So I have a nested loop here that looks suspiciously similar to the same code that we just wrote. This right here in Tetris is creating all the empty blocks in my Tetris program. And literally I go over columns and rows. Same exact thing as here. Okay. So nested loops are pretty important for going over loops of things. All right. For things like puzzle games and whatnot. Okay. Any questions on that, the nested loop? You can go higher, too. What if I had a 3D Tetris board? Let's say I had a 3D. You guys ever play virtual Tetris, VR Tetris? No, doesn't exist yet. You guys can write that next. That'd be pretty cool. How would I write this to loop over each depth as well? How would I add that to this loop?
Nest another 4.
Okay. You guys go ahead and do that. So write this, write a nested depth loop that adds, you basically think about making virtual Tetris. I'm surprised no one's made virtual Tetris yet, because all these VR kits are coming, like Oculus is out. I'm sure someone will make a 3D Tetris, right? That'd be pretty cool. Like where you're like walking around and you're seeing not only, you have to make Tetrises not only in like 2 dimensions, but a third dimensions as well. So you guys can copy this. I want to see it print out coordinates for every single block inside a 3D Tetris game that's 5 by 3 by 5, right? Just like this, but just add another loop. How do you do that? Okay, so here's a hint. Look at the pattern that I'm using. What comes after J in the alphabet?
M.
K? Someone say M? I don't know what alphabet. Are you missing like K in the alphabet? that's a hint because you're going to need to make a new variable to store that. This is called a triple nested loop. So here, like, you want to kind of follow the pattern. See how a loop is? Think about how a loop is written. I would suggest even writing this loop. You need to write a loop. Your line, the lines of code that you're going to write, you need to write at least 3 lines of code. So you're missing curly braces here. Like, notice how your loop, like, if you got rid of, you could leave that line here for depth just temporarily. So that whole line. See what that loop? There's 2 distinct loops. There's this outside one and an inside one. So you need a 3rd distinct loop. And it needs to be nested. You have to figure out where it goes. Oh, if you need the rest of the program here, let me. If you guys want a starting off spot, I'll copy this up to Zool. All right, I put that file up on Zool. It's called Guess My Number. Not really Guess My Number, but. It should print out 5 times 5, 25. It should print out 75 times. No. No, that's not it. Does it look like 75 to me? You guys are right here. That's right. Show me your code. Oh, no. You're not using right variables there. That's not 75 at all.
It's okay.
That is 125.
Oh my god. Be quiet.
Change your depth to be 10 and show me again.
The change itself.
Uh-huh. That looks better. Can you format that in a way that makes it a little bit more legible? Can you put an end line at the end? Yeah. That looks better. So it should basically go through every possible combination of blocks. Yeah, looks good. Cool. How do you nest a loop inside of another loop?
Nobody. You're better than nobody.
You stop. Good. On the right track.
Who was that guy?
You.
It was It's an ancestor.
That's exactly what it is. Don't care. That's me.
Almost. You have to nest that somewhere. Show me your code. That's right. Where would we put the curly braces, though? You're missing a set of curly braces for that innermost loop. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
There's the
Where did you actually put your regarding nest, I don't know if you know the answer to this.
I just have a question.
I'm trying to find what the first use it for a problem.
like when you write the first one, like for I, you put the for loop for J inside of it.
We write everything.
Inside of
Yeah,
it.
our composers are amazing. Like the people that write music for our games. Yeah, You could do it. You can make your own.
There's a few programs that let you write these.
Yeah.
Like
Rodman.
Game Jam ones. Took him a few days, but he got some nice games.
That's cool.
Do they have a Windows version of Garlic Jam? Is that,
You know, I don't know. What I used to use is a program called Fruity Loops. It's like kind of a
Fruity Loop.
professional version of like a sound editing stuff that the actual industry artists use. Make their soundtracks. I think there's a version of it that probably is more like free. But if you Google, you're looking for some kind of sequencer. Yeah. Music sequencer. Yeah. That's like an example of one. But I don't know if you want an online one or something you actually download. A lot of these things are like, so you basically pull samples, like Load of
424 should start.
Like going down, right?
No.
It's confusing why mine goes. Yours is great. Mine's like.
So this is actually
weird, right?
kind of more like you're literally putting notes. There's a better way to do it too if you go back. There's versions where you basically
Oh, no, wait, never mind.
the examples of like
From this far.
I just.
No, you're still.
Find one for you. Yeah, 1 second. How many times? More than I would have expected. That's good. That's correct.
You're a horrible person, John.
I know.
I just wondered why mine was different than his.
What's that? Why yours?
Because mine goes like this like straight out. It's
Oh,
weird.
because he's probably using N-line. Yeah.
Okay.
Using N-line at the end.
Okay.
All right, let me just show you how that is. To write a triple nested for loop, you're going to make another for loop inside of this one here. Inside of the other one, you're going to move this guy up, so he's going to just get put right up in there. And you're going to print out. Okay. The output here is going to be kind of not really legible because you're trying to print a 3D representation of a space in lines here. Wouldn't worry about that too much. If you want to, you can kind of break up the lines here. What you should see though is that it's a multiple of all of those things. So it's 5 times 3 times 5. So it should be 75 different possible lines or possible outputs. 75 of these total. Make this 10. Should be 125 lines now. I'll just trust that the computer does 125 lines. So triple nested loops, you can go even further if you wanted to. There's no real limit to this. Like you can keep adding loops as long as you have variables that you can name. You can go this deep if you want to. We actually have several triple nested loops all over the place actually in our pathfinding code. So without going into too much detail, we use what's called voxel pathfinding. It's a way to represent, imagine like Minecraft. You guys know what Minecraft is, like 3D space, like cubes. Those are technically voxels, so like you have cubes that are in 3D space. In order to actually do Minecraft style work, Minecraft is literally this. It's like how many rows deep is it, how many columns wide is it, and how many blocks tall is it. There's 3 dimensions when you do it. So you're going to be, if you want to write a Minecraft style code, you're going to be doing triple nested loops everywhere because you want to do things on all 3 axes, right? All right. Any questions on this? time ago. All right. So just to review, for loops work by initialization first, then they test, then they run the body, then they update. And then if your text expression returns false, then you run the statement below the loop. Homework. I'm giving you guys 2 homework problems this week.
2?
It's just 2 problems.
It's too much.
Ah, that looks up. Okay. Number 2 is a very common programming interview question. So first of all, let's go to number 1. I want you to write a dice rolling program again. This time you're going to be rolling only a 20-sided die. And I want you to ask the player how many dice they want to roll. And then I want you to add up the results of all these dice and output it. But you have to use a for loop this time. Okay? Hopefully it's easy. Number 2, write a program that asks the user for a number and then outputs the factorial of that number. You have to use a for loop as well. The factorial of a number is literally that number, those digits, multiplied by each other all the way up to n. So in this case, the factorial of 5 is 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5. They get very big. So like factorial of 100 is insanely huge. Like that is very, very large. But I want you to write the result of this using a for loop. Okay? This is a very common programming question because we ask you this 2 ways. One, we ask you to do it this way. This is called the iterative way. Literally, you're using a loop. And for you guys, the ones that have taken this class before, you get to write it the other way, which is to write it using a recursive loop. I think you guys have done this before, right? I think I asked you guys to write a factorial program to figure out recursively.
Yeah, I think it was more of just me asking you questions.
Okay, so then all of you, so you should be good at that. So the other guys, this is literally like one of the questions that we ask. It's a very common programming interview question. Find the factorial of a number using recursive functions. And find the factorial using a for loop. Okay. All right. Weirdly enough, using a for loop is much longer than writing it with
Is there
recursive.
an actual
Recursive
factorial
function is a function that calls itself.
shortcut, I guess?
There's probably a math library out there that does it, but you're not going to be using that anyway. So and actually, most of the time, I don't think I've ever used factorial in my game development career, other than for like programming interview questions. So this is purely like an academic kind of thing, just to get some practice in for writing for loops. Okay. All right. And then next week, we're going to be doing a deep dive on for loops again. This time, hopefully you guys will have enough awareness of how to use it with just regular numbers. We're going to be using for loops with things called arrays and objects. So that's when we start getting into the game development, because I'm going to bring in a graphics drawing library that we have called SFML. We're going to use that to make games. Okay. All right, so that's it, everyone. Thank you. I'll see you guys next week.